Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started just to be respectful of everybody's time. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Use the chat to kind of introduce yourself, say where you're from if you want to do that. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A. As people start dropping questions in the Q&A, you can upvote those questions. So if there's a question that you're also interested in, make sure to upvote that. And we will be answering questions at the end from the Q&A. So if you have a question, put it in the Q&A rather than the chat. That'll just help us. So yeah. My name is Morgan. That's Kyeisha, and this is Perfecting Your Primary Application. I am finishing up my senior year at Clemson. Well, I guess I'm done now, but I'm graduating on Friday. My major was health science with a concentration in health promotion and behavior, minors in biological sciences and Spanish studies, and I will be starting medical school at NYU Grossman School of Medicine this summer.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kyeisha. I graduated last year from the University of Maryland. I studied cellular biology and genetics and a minor in French. I'm at my gap year now, doing research at the NIH, and I'll be starting at Harvard in the fall.
So just a little bit of an overview about the primary application. The primary application is seen by every medical school that you apply to. So it's more of a generic information. So when you're filling out your primary application, you don't want to put like, I want to go to so-and-so school, because every school that you apply to is going to see that. When we refer to the primary application, we're talking about filling out your application in AMCAS, TMD-SAS, or ACOMAS. So these are the sections of the AMCAS application, but all of them on all the different application services are very similar. So you have the identifying information, schools attended, biographic information, coursework, work and activities, letters of eval, medical schools, essays, and standardized tests. And so today we're going to focus on the work and activities section and letters of evaluation section. In previous webinars, we have covered the personal statement, which is a part of the essay section. So make sure to go back and check that out on my Instagram and her YouTube if you're interested.
Great. So let's start talking about activities section.
So a couple of different do's and don'ts. These are all general. So some things that you do want to do in your activity section is going to be provide context for uncommon organizations or roles. So, for things such as a scribe, you don't really need to tell us exactly what you did as a scribe or an EMT, because those are things that like a lot of applicants will have, and the roles are pretty similar across different places. However, if you're a part of an organization, like I was a part of the Council of Diversity Affairs, that's unique to my school. And so I want to provide just a little bit of background about what their role is. Share specifics and stories when you can. How you show rather than telling your personal statement, that kind of is the same in the activity section, even though you are limited to a smaller character count. Definitely include a hobby. It makes you seem human. And then I think it's also just fun just to see who you are outside of medicine, and make sure that you show your impacts, the impact that you had on the activity, the impact that the activity had on you. It's just really just making us understand why you decided to include this activity in your personal statement, in your activity section. And then the don't try to include everything you've done for each activity. So we don't want it to sound like a resume. So don't say, if I was going back to the coded example, in code, I did X, 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 X. Like, we want to rather see you show a story and just like focus on one part of your activity rather than trying to include every single thing. Don't try to connect every activity back to medicine. The activity section is to learn about you, who you are as a person. And so of course, if you have an activity that's clinical, where it's like EMT or MA, of course, I think that's naturally related back to medicine, but you don't have to try to force everything to have a connection to medicine. Don't try to sell yourself. The AMC core competencies are amazing, and I use those to kind of help figure out what experiences from each of my activity I wanted to include and write about. But you don't want to, at every activity said, and I'm more adaptable and flexible because of this. You don't want to make it sound like you're trying to like force us to understand that you have all of the core competencies. And lastly, this is just for any parts of your application. Don't be negative. It sucks to read something that's negative. So just try to be positive and put a positive spin on everything that you can.
Awesome. Okay, so next, how do you pick your experiences? So I think this was definitely challenging for me at first when I was approaching it, because I was looking at, okay, everything that I've done, and it's like there are 15 slots, and I'm like, okay, what am I actually going to put on my application? And I think the first thoughts is kind of thinking like, okay, is there like a formula? Is there something I'm supposed to put? Like, this is kind of different than anything else you've applied for, right? But as I kind of like asked around and, went to events like this one last year and realized that, like, as we've been saying, it's really just to understand like who you are. And so showing experiences that were meaningful to you. So these are kind of the questions that I asked myself and that I'll ask you all in the audience today is for each experience, was it meaningful to you in your journey? Was it significant in hours and time? So if it was like 20 hours 4 years ago, I mean, is that really, depending on whatever the activity is, I know there's some mission trips, for example, that might accumulate to 20 hours or things like that. But definitely want to think about that. And then also important to note is that did it occur in college or beyond? So I think a common misconception might be like including things from high school. And I think from what I understand on basis, that's just not, you shouldn't put things from high school on there. I think I'll have one example where I had hospital volunteering that started in high school and I continued it through college. And so I included the high school hours separately so schools could see that it was like something I started, but if they wanted to totally disregard those hours, they could just like completely cross them out. So you definitely answer questions about that as well. But overall, when picking your experiences, there's no type of formula. There's no like, oh, one research, one clinical, one type of this. You also don't need to hit all the different types of experience types. Like there's no formula, no cheat code.
And you'll see kind of today, like we don't hit on all of the different experience types because even between the two of us, we didn't hit on every single one. So like it's totally normal.
Absolutely. So to start picking your experiences and brainstorming, I made this brainstorming tool last year, and I'll drop the link at the end of the webinar. But basically what I did was just put down all the different experience types and then some prompts. So like writing a description of what you did, any leadership positions, impact what you learn, and 1 to 2 patients. So this was just kind of like a guide that I was doing to help me think of each activity and brainstorm. And this just helped me like before diving into like, okay, 700 characters, write something like that. Kind of really hard to do. So this helped me like lead into it when I was like, okay, here's one really impactful story. Here's what I really like, let's say like 200 hours of teaching. Okay, how did that really, really impact me? And by doing this brainstorming, reflecting, I think it helped to make my activities like really reflective and show that impact. So that's something that I suggest. Great. Okay, so now we're going to get started. Morgan and I will kind of go back and forth, reading and explaining some of our activity descriptions. And you'll see in the top in purple what we categorize them as. So the first one is community service, medical, clinical. So this is, I think it's also important to try to, as much as possible, like categorize your things correctly. So medical, clinical, that should be anything that like you actually had hands-on, experience with patients and stuff like that in your community service. So this was my experience at the Pregnancy Aid Center. So I wrote for, this part up here is the description, and then this was most meaningful. So this paragraph down here is most meaningful. So I said the Pregnancy Aid Center is a nonprofit women's health clinic that primarily serves the uninsured and underinsured women of the College Park area. My time at PAC emphasized the socioeconomic and racial disparities within healthcare, as many of our patients were Latina, Black, or immigrants. As a volunteer, I helped to triage patients by greeting them, taking their blood pressure, and conducting pregnancy tests. During my time triaging patients, I interpreted for French-speaking patients and learned Spanish phrases to best engage with and welcome our patients into the clinic. And then for most meaningful, at PAC, I saw stark differences in the resources compared to clinics in affluent neighborhoods. I recognized that the hands-on clinical experience that I received as a pre-med student were due to these disparities in care. With this realization of my own privilege, I aim to give compassionate care and find ways to connect with each patient. I'll never forget my interactions with Sherry. I began asking her the required questions prior to the physician visit, to which she responded with one-word answers. As we spoke, I noticed her West Indian accent and shared that I too am from the Caribbean. As we connected over our shared experiences, Sherry went back to the questions I asked before and expanded on her answers, explaining how she was worried about her physical exam results. I thanked her for sharing, empathized with her worries, and took detailed notes on what she said to pass on to the physician. I have found that, especially in the Caribbean, there are many stigmas, fears, and misunderstandings when it comes to medicine. I understand that each patient's relationship with medicine stems from personal experiences, as well as the culture they are raised in. I learned to approach each patient with the aim to gain their trust and empower them by building their understanding of their own care. So definitely is a little bit of a little essay there, the most meaningful. A couple of things I want to highlight here, things that just were important to me. So you'll see that I talk about what I did without like doing a whole list. So this one sentence here, I explain what I did just in one sentence, just give a little bit of background that of the clinical experience. But what was really important to me when I reflect on my time at the Pregnancy Aid Center was exactly what I talked about, which was that compared to other volunteer positions, I didn't have those like hands-on experiences. But now I walked into this clinic and like from my first day, they were like, okay, start like help here, take this chart, do this. And as a pre-med, you're like, oh, like this is exciting, it's hands-on. But at the same time for me, like what I really impacted me, I was like, this is because there's disparities in care. Like I'm just a pre-med student. And so it really made me like try to do my best to provide the best care possible, even though I was just a volunteer. And that's something I talked about in my interviews, as well as I wanted to convey here. And then I told a story because it really was impactful to me. And it helped me to also be able to expand on what I'm passionate about, which is Caribbean health and breaking down those stigmas, which is what I want to do in the future. So it all is, you know, I think what this description is really focusing on what was important to me, what I learned, and I hope also showed a little bit of who I am as a person based on my passion. So we started with a long one, apologies. But yeah, that was this description. Okay, now they're getting shorter, so only 700 characters. This one's also mine. Here's a non-medical clinical community service. This was for Habitat for Humanity. So I said I planned 2 service trips for my pre-health student organization with Habitat for Humanity. Volunteering with Habitat taught me not only how to patch a hole in the wall, but also the lesson about giving a hand up, not a hand out, meaning to empower others for a more sustainable future by addressing underlying issues, such as a need for education or other services. This motto was personified through all the activities we did, as we were encouraged to empathize with those in our community, putting ourselves in their shoes rather than to pity them. These lessons stuck with me as I worked to build the needed affordable housing in my community. And so here you'll start to see, like, if you read my entire application, there are definitely some themes that came across just because everything I did, a lot of what I did was related to like health equity, health disparities, and a lot of like diversity work. Here, I honestly just, again, I reflected back on the experience, and that's exactly what they kind of were telling us. They were like, they really focused on that hand up, not a handout. They're like, yes, you're here volunteering and, you know, these people need housing, but it's like, they're working alongside us. We're working with them and we're trying to address things in the community to help them. And so that's just what I focused on was, again, what did I learn from that experience?
I definitely think, you know, in situations where you're doing like volunteer work, especially maybe in more underserved areas like that, not writing your description where you like pity them and like feel bad for them. I think just definitely the way that you approach that and that tone is really, really important.
Yeah, I definitely want to touch on that because I think with some, that's like one of my biggest, actually, to add on like the do's or don'ts.
I know, I was thinking about that.
Is especially when, yeah, like exactly, talking very, very, very careful when you talk about underserved populations. Like even in my last essay as well, like I used the word, like I talked about talking about my own privilege, or sometimes people do a lot of like, you call it like trauma porn, and start writing these descriptions of like, this person had this, that, and they went through this, that, and they don't have this and that. And like, at that point, you're going so much into describing all the honestly trauma that this person has. And reading that, I'm like, what are you trying to evoke from the reader? Like focus on like addressing the fact, like first take it off of the person. I think be careful with the words that you use. For example, I had a really great podcast recently I was listening to where not saying like homelessness or like homeless people, but instead like people experiencing homelessness. Kind of like putting that humanity-centered language, I think is really important. And I'm definitely not an expert on that at all, but I do try to like do research and stuff. So I think if you're talking about a vulnerable population, definitely like try to do some research, see what are the appropriate ways to talk about it, and then just take a step back from whatever you wrote and make sure like how am I being respectful to that community and really uplifting them and the things that they need, or am I describing all the things they don't have? Like, I hope that made sense. But I
Yeah.
think it's really, really important. So thank you, Morgan, for bringing that up.
Yeah, and that's the same, like people, you might like a patient, like a person with diabetes or things like that, rather than saying like diabetic patient, you're just like kind of describing that after, because the patient or the person comes first. And we're not perfect, our activities aren't perfect, but like just things that we've also like learned throughout the process.
Yeah, definitely. There are probably some things I would rewrite differently.
Yeah.
So and I also don't think medical schools expect you to be perfect on these things. I think as a society, like we're constantly learning and trying to do better. But yeah, definitely at least try your best. And yeah, just be like respectful. Okay.
All right, so this is a hobby. So in college, I learned how to coupon to save money, but it has turned into so much more. The fun in couponing is the creativity and flexibility I get to come out of a store with stuff I need and new things to try just because they are free or almost free. The night before couponing, I spend time creating my scenario and clipping the coupons. And then I wake up early to arrive when the store opens, hoping to catch the deals while everything is still in stock. The thrill of watching my total drop as the cashier scans the coupons will never get old. I wouldn't consider myself an extreme couponer yet, but I hope to keep learning and eventually be able to stockpile enough items to donate. So this was just like a hobby. I think a hobby like makes you like human, honestly. So I highly recommend including one in your application. Anything that like you're passionate about and that you do. I actually read someone's application where they're like a Yelp elite, which I think is like so cool. Like you get this like special status if you write so many reviews on Yelp, and it like invites you to like go and review restaurants. It could be like running, like anything that you do that is like fun for you, include it.
I literally love that so much.
I think it's so fun. And I got to like connect with so many people that were like, oh my God, you coupon? I do too. Like I was telling people were like, oh, what's the like the lowest amount that you've spent and what you got? So like honestly, it was a hit. Couponing was a hit.
That's so great. And I will just say, like, I love what reading her description, like as you can like see it, like how she's doing it, and you can see like her emotion come out. And I think that's so important.
Imagery is like super important, is if you can incorporate that.
This one's yours.
Oh, I think I split. Did you have a hobby in there?
I
think I split yours. Anyways, we can just do this one now. Okay. So this is extracurricular activities. And so this was me being a tour guide. So following an intensive selection process, I was chosen as one of 40 tour guides from my university out of almost 500 applicants. My first tour was with admitted students. I was excited to share my favorite undergraduate moments that shaped my Clemson experience, like rushing the field after a football game. The following day, a family saw me and thanked me for helping to solidify their decision to come to Clemson. Now, at the beginning of each tour, I ask each prospective student to share their intended major and what they hope to gain for the tour. Listening to others' needs helped me tailor my tour to create a memorable experience for prospective students. So I think some of the key things that you can see here, numbers are always great. Anything that you can use to like quantify your impact, but this just also showed like how selective the process was, like 40 out of 500. And then also this kind of like showed, I think, a couple of the core competencies, like really learning how to be like adaptable and learning from different things. So yeah, and it also just showed like that I did something fun. Like it was kind of crazy because like I'm including this on my application. I'm like, this probably isn't the most significant. They care about my clinical experience. And the first question I got in one of my interviews was, what's your favorite question you've been asked as a tour guide? So just remember, anything you put on your application, they might ask you about it. And like even the most like obscure things, it might just resonate with someone.
I love that. I love rushing the field after football games.
Oh my God. Yeah. And I go to a big football school. So like that is definitely a thing. Yeah. Okay. I definitely inserted mine in the wrong spot, but back to hobbies.
All good. And I saw someone mentioning like love to include hobbies that you love, but maybe not do every single day for millions of hours or anything. This one is a lot of hours because I started my blog in 2015, but hours in general, we cut them out here, but like you don't have to have like thousands of hours. Like,
definitely not.
Put your especially with the pandemic. I know that has impacted all of us, and it's still impacting like the people applying this cycle as well as next cycle. So just write and explain your impact. Like I think putting time in and they'll be able to see that, that you were putting time and you tried, and then whatever happened.
Yeah. I mean, I think like if you have like all of your activities were only like a month, I'd be like, okay, that's weird. Everything's a month. Like, do you have any kind of like long-term experience? But like not everything needs to be something that you've done for like over a year, because they understand that like life happens.
Yeah, but we'll definitely, we can touch on that more in like the Q&A and kind of stuff
Definitely.
that we felt. I can expand more on some of my hours, for example. But anyways, back to hobbies, my favorite. So here's my hobby. I talked about my blog, Style by Kai. I started my blog entitled Style by Kai in 2015, simply to share my love for fashion. However, it quickly grew into much more. Today, my blog tells my story as a first-generation pre-medical student. It provides motivation and inspiration to other students as I share resources such as study guides and transparency of my journey, with some outfit ideas along the way. I also launched a small business selling self-designed digital planners to help students stay organized while in college. My brand has allowed me to creatively express myself through fashion, graphic design, video editing, creative writing, and social media management. So again, it's pretty straightforward. It literally is how I describe my blog to people. And yeah, and I got asked this in every single medical school interview. Sometimes the first question as well was about the blog. So definitely, please. And I remember like I was very scared, like going into this whole like medical school cycle. And I was like, oh, am I allowed to include this kind of stuff?
There's a
And
lot of, yeah.
yeah, like, but I'm so glad that I did, and that we both can show you guys that putting on hobbies and even putting on the blog where it's like the website is here, like they can go and look it up. It's
Literally.
like, hey, it's literally me. Like I had nothing. I'm like, this is me, and I came into this process being fully myself, and I worked out completely fine. So I hope that that helps someone who maybe feels the same way.
Yeah. And I
So,
think here, like, I see a lot of things, like her time management skills, being able to start a small business, like while being in college, and like taking the time. Like, I don't even know if these are things that like she was intentional about like showing, but like people see that. So I see time management. I see someone that cares about pouring into other people, which I think is really important as a physician. So you can just see how like you don't have to be explicit with trying to say you have all these skills, but just like the way you write your activities, a lot of those will come across, and it might not always be intentional on your end. And I will also say I did not choose to include my social media account on my primary application, just personally because like I felt like it was a little bit newer. It definitely didn't start in 2015, but it was something that I included in my secondary essays. And mine was public. I literally followed every medical school that I applied to during the cycle from my public account. So it worked out fine.
yeah, I also followed medical school.
I was like, everybody can find my school list at any point because I just followed all the schools I applied to.
That is true. We could honestly do a whole webinar on like social media and medicine and stuff, because like I
No,
have a lot of
seriously.
that's a whole different conversation. Let's not even get into it.
No.
But for the most part, obviously we both have public pages, and we both did that. And there's just right ways and wrong ways to do everything in life, and that also includes social media and blogging.
Yes.
So don't be afraid to put yourself out there if you're doing the right things. But yeah, hobbies are literally great. Okay, honors and awards. You can get started.
Yeah, so for honors awards recognition, I think it's really helpful just to include all of these in one activity. And a lot of the times people just put like 0 hours. So like mine was like scholarships and stuff. And like I can't quantify like how many hours I spent in class to get president's list. So I just put 0 hours for this, but I included president's list. I guess I probably should have put that meant like getting a 4.0, but like whatever. It worked out. You see, as we go back, we realize like things that we could have done differently. But you can see like the scholarship I got, I put the year, and nobody knows like what the Frank A. Burtner scholarship is. So I put like a just brief general description about what it was so people would understand that. Same thing with the scholarship, and then 2 other awards that I received. And I chose to put this one award that was from high school, just because I included it with other activities, but it's also 4-H is something that I included on my application because it's something I started when I was 5 years old, and I actually am still involved with now. So it was relevant to something I did in college. And everybody make sure if you have questions that you're putting them in the Q&A, just so we will get to those at the end.
Yeah, so totally agree with everything. I think that a couple things, I think when it comes to like dean's list and president's list, depending on your space, so for example, I didn't put that because I didn't have space, but that they can obviously see from your grades, right? Like, okay, 4.0 GPA means, so you can always think about that. And I did the exact same thing as Morgan. I provided some descriptions to stuff that they wouldn't otherwise know. But yeah, you just listed out 0 hours. that's what we did.
And kind of like similar to like, if you don't have space to put president's list, like I wouldn't list a whole honors awards activity just to say like that you got president's list, because that's something that they can see for your grade from your grades as well.
Yeah, I also agree with that, because 15 can be a small number depending on what you're trying to pack in there. So okay, so now we have leadership, and I'll say like also when I was applying, I was also kind of nervous because I have a lot of leadership on my application, and I was like, dang, they're gonna think like this girl needs to go be a leader and not a doctor. um, but again, I was fine. Do what you're passionate about throughout college, and then put what you're passionate about on your application. So this is a most meaningful one. So it's another long one. So I have the Charles R. Drew pre-health, and this is one, sorry, I was involved with from 2018 to 2021. And it was like 500 hours. So it's definitely a lot of different things packed in. And you'll see by reading it how I'm picking out the most meaningful from like 3 years. So the Charles R. Drew CRD exists to provide resources and a supportive environment to minority pre-health students. Serving on the Community Service Committee as secretary, vice president, and co-president has allowed me to contribute towards the mission of diversifying medicine through organizing bi-weekly meetings, community service, workshop, and our annual networking event. My positions enabled me to enhance my problem-solving skills as I led my executive board through our first virtual year. Despite these challenges, my creative ideas led to record high membership involvement from 50 to 100 students attending our meetings. And then most meaningful. As a first-generation college student, I felt lost on my pre-med journey. This was until I joined CRD, where I was given guidance, support, and above all, community. I made it my mission to give back to this organization that helped me and increased the number of underrepresented students applying to medical school. I'm most proud of how our community has strengthened under my leadership. I spearheaded new initiatives such as Member Mondays to highlight members' achievements, developed creative ways to continue to connect with our members on social media, such as takeovers from current medical students, and created a mentoring program that matches undergraduate students with medical school mentors. I planned and hosted the first annual Minority Women in Medicine Symposium, which featured 10 distinguished minority women physicians and 70 student participants. Under my leadership, I wanted to ensure that every member saw a representation of themselves in medicine and felt that this organization supported them each step of the way, as it did for me. I'm excited to continue my passion for diversifying medicine as one of 10 pre-medical students chosen to be 2021 to 2022 SNMA National Leadership Fellow. So yeah, it's a lot in there. So kind of my strategy, or I guess with writing this, again, I definitely did focus on like what was most important to me. And that was definitely the community aspect. And then 2, just the providing resources. And like I said, feeling lost in this organization really helping me, like, especially as a Black woman trying to go into medicine and as a first generation student. And then just like being super, super passionate. I think with this one, I definitely focused, I didn't do this with all my activities, but I did focus a little bit more on like some of the skills and the impact, which I think don't like overdo it with the skills. I mentioned like problem solving skills, it's a little cringe. You're like, but you know, it still worked.
It's the way you look back at it and read it, and you're like, hold on.
Exactly. You know, basically, you don't want every single thing to be like, I tutored and I learned this skill. I did leadership, I learned this skill. So this is probably the only time in my application the word skills comes up. And I could have been more like je ne sais quoi with it instead of saying it up front. But anyways, I did want to, having all these big leadership roles, I did want to be like, okay, this is a leadership description. This girl clearly did all these roles. What the heck did you do in these roles? So I did really emphasize like specific things that I did, especially like the symposium that we did, the networking event. Like these are huge events that took like months and months of work. The mentorship program was brand new. The Members Monday, these are all like new things that I started and I was really passionate about. And by including them here, I definitely talked a lot about in my interviews. And then also, this is something I'm continuing. So like, I really love being an SNMA. So I did a year-long leadership fellowship. And then in medical school, I plan to apply to SNMA positions, as well as hopefully in the future, like national positions. So again, this was a heavy hitter description for me because I was like, this is like, I pour a lot into this. So yeah, so that's how I did it. And if you have something similar, hopefully this kind of helps you give some ideas of like putting your impact without being too like blah, 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 blah. Like it still kind of flows and like tells a little bit of a story.
And I think there are some descriptions that like may not always just like fit with the general, you know, like telling a story. There are some that it's just hard to tell a story. So like this is really okay. And we can still tell that like she is super passionate about CRD. And so I think that's important that you still are able to see that passion and that like all of the activities aren't like trying to sell yourself and things. So there's a really good mix here, which I think is an important part. Right. So this is my paid employment, medical, clinical. And so on the left side, we have the general description. At a small practice, I initially felt out of place as the medical assistants knew every patient's name the moment they walked through the door. Trying to learn them proved difficult as their faces were covered by a mask, and I was simultaneously trying to retain my training on injections, phlebotomy, and COVID-19 tests. However, each day I recognize one more name, one more face, and remember one more fact about each patient that comes in. Now, as I am taking a patient's vitals, I find myself continuing the conversation from their last visit in hopes of further building a connection. I hope to utilize this skill with my future patients as a physician. So just a little bit there, like debrief this first part. Yeah, like that last sentence is like kind of cringe when I look back and read it, but like that's one of those instances where it's like it's a clinical experience, so you can relate it back to medicine, and you can see like trying to retain my training, like, and so that was just the way that I like briefly included what my roles were, since this was a clinical position, without saying I did this, 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 and this. And so I will jump into the most meaningful. Is this just okay? My time at the clinic provided me with the opportunity to learn and research the COVID-19 vaccine. During Christmas break, I was able to utilize my knowledge of the vaccine to address vaccine hesitancy among my family and friends through one-on-one conversations and social media posts. Addressing skepticism around the vaccine is of particular importance to me because of the historical and ongoing mistrust of the healthcare system by Black Americans. However, considering the disproportionate rates of hospitalizations and deaths due to COVID-19, I did not want us to be left behind. My passion for addressing vaccine concerns led me to develop a vaccine outreach program with a predominantly Black church. The church leader provided a list of members who were eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine. I reached out, explained information on the vaccine, and set them up with an appointment. After helping just a few church members, other community members began showing up at the clinic to find out how they could get vaccinated too. This experience has been incredibly rewarding, and it has led me to focus more on learning how to create and find solutions to address two major barriers to healthcare: education and accessibility. I now plan to incorporate community health initiatives into my future career. Just a little kind of different things that I want to talk about here. This was like super important to me. Came up in a lot of my interviews when I now talk about, I want to work with like underserved Black and Latinx populations. Like I have experience to back that up. And literally, like I was able to talk about in my interviews, like they asked me about this experience, and I was like, we literally had someone that came up and we were trying to call them, and like their number wasn't going through. And we had this woman show up, and she was like, this is a person that is homeless and they don't even have a cell phone, but like I can connect with them. So like being able to get that person vaccinated, I think that's something that's like resonated and stayed with me. So that was just like kind of an example of how you could show a story.
This was amazing. Like, it's definitely one of my favorites. You can tell, like, I think all your descriptions are great, but like you can tell the ones that are like the most meaningful. They just
Definitely.
Yeah, a couple of things like just to highlight that you all pay attention to, like, again, the way that she tied in the stuff that she was learning without saying I did XYZ. Amazing. I love the like getting to know one more patient one by one. That was you showing like, I want to, instead of writing like I want to connect with my patients, like you're like showing it, like it's kind of flowing like a story. And I just love like the impact here, like kind of same as my last description. Like I talked about stuff that I started, like it's very awkward, like talking about yourself.
Yes.
And like, I don't know the word, like it's just awkward, but you have to do it because like that you did that, whatever it is, whatever impact you had in your description.
If
like,
you're gonna hype yourself up once in your life, this is the
this is the time. This is your moment. And of course, do it in a way that it's genuine. It's speaking from passion. You're speaking about why you did it. It's not a bragging or like you want to come across in a genuine way. But if it's something you did out of passion, like it's gonna come across that way, the same way that these are reading now. So like, I love it.
Yeah, and then like that last sentence, planning to incorporate community health initiatives, that was super important to me because my background is in public health, and in my applications, I talked about getting a master's in public health, and so that was like one direct way that like this was like the moment where I was like, wow, like I didn't really understand like how an MPH and an MD, like how those work together and how you use both. But I was like, wow, like this actually makes sense now. And so I was able to actually connect those as well.
And I think that's so important. And I think something we can also talk about is I think it's so important in your personal statement. If you include things like, I want to work with underserved populations, I want to do public health, or like certain things, you should definitely have some kind of activities that connect in some ways. And you might not have the experience to go out and do something like that smack dab, help disparities or something. But for example, even a lot of the work that I did, my leadership stuff, or even like my tutoring, when I tutored, it was like first generation, like Black students, like trying to like bridge that gap. Or when my leadership was like diversity work. So when I talk about in the future also wanting to do medicine but do anti-racism and like it still fits in even if it wasn't direct. So I would say definitely don't start throwing in sentences without like the actions to kind of back it up a little bit. 100%. I think that at least strengthens, like, because then you're looking at the application like, okay, this person's clearly passionate because they did stuff about it. Like this description here. Great.
This is one for paid employment. So this is me working as a health professions advising intern. So although I wore many hats as a health professions advising intern, my favorite project was starting an accepted student series on YouTube. I reached out to students who had been accepted to health professional schools and organized video interviews with them. It was exciting to celebrate their good news and provide a space to share their advice and experiences with future students. After the interview, I edited and compiled the clips using iMovie and allowed the students to review the finished product. I aim to share these on a platform that any future student could access. The process taught me how to use my interest in medicine to express my creativity and collaborate with others. No, I don't know like why I can't talk tonight. I'm really struggling out here. But in this one, I also wanted to include on the right, you guys can see an older description. So this was like one of my very first drafts. And so you can see like in that first sentence, I create content and run our social media and maintain bulletin board, assist with events, and I help develop the careers and health professions course. That is a resume. Oh my God, it is so cringy to look back at it. And so that's just like an example of like your activities will evolve. And so like, rather than talking about every single thing I did, like I did elaborate on that in interviews. I just focused on this one single thing that I did. And medical schools are going to understand you have 700 characters. This is not to tell us your full life story. This is to tell us, why this experience was impactful for you. And so that was the most impactful thing that I did as an intern. And so that is what I decided to focus on.
Love it. I'm so glad you included this old one because you can imagine like it just like it reads so much better your new one. Like if you have every single description, it's like, and this I did blah, 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 and this I did blah, blah, blah. Like it's just,
and then it also gets choppy. Like this is a great way to share advice with future students. That is such a short, simple sentence. And then the HPA director was relatively new when I started. Who cares? This ain't about her. This is about me. So just like little things like that, like make sure you like also like try to keep the focus on you because like this is your medical school application. They don't really care about the HPA director.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's going to be awkward. But like your medical application should be one place where it's I, like
literally
I, everything's I. Love it. And just a reminder to put questions in the Q&A.
Awesome. So this is physician shadowing / clinical observation. And so I personally decided to include all of mine in one activity, which is highly recommended because you might write a brief description about shadowing, but even if you don't have space for that, that's totally fine because shadowing is very passive. So what I have blanked out is just the hospital system. So I personally did not list physician names, but I listed the hospital system and then the specialty / specialties that I shadowed in there. So I did 4 different hospital systems. And then I have this brief one little like experience that really resonated with me from shadowing. And so I did put this physician here who was an anesthesiologist. And a big question that a lot of people get is like, what do I put for the organization name? What do I do for this? And so personally, I put the organization name that that this physician was a part of. And then I also decided to put her contact information specifically. And I knew like she could vouch that like I had chatted other physicians.
Yeah, that's great. There's a lot of questions. Like we were literally just in your shoes last year. That's why we're doing this, right? Like, how do you write about this and stuff? I did something similar. I'd have just in paragraph form, specialty. I have doctor's name blanked out and I put hours because I can't remember how I think I just had all the hours in one and then I divide them up here. I guess I could have also broken them up, but I guess I shadowed multiple specialties in one time. So I just broke it up by who I shadowed with. Again, depending on how your hours are looking is how you can break it up, whatever makes more sense for you. I also had perspective hours because of my job at the NIH. So I just made sure to say perspective there. So they knew that. And then again, just a very small thing, like shadowing is very it's very passive and it's hard to like tell a story. I love the story you told. I just said that, it gave me insight into the world of medicine. I like the collaborative nature and how they form connections with each patient. So just, didn't have much space to go into anything else, but
yeah. And that's a lot of times, while I will say, like, most of the times I would not recommend putting shadowing as your most meaningful. Like, I'm sure there's a couple of people that have pulled it off, but like usually shadowing is like very passive. And so, just like a lot of times people are going to get the same outcome from shadowing. I saw how physicians worked as a team and they were able to collaborate, and things like that. Also, just a reminder, we won't be answering questions in the chat, so make sure you put them in the Q&A so we can get to all of them at the end. But yeah, there's a couple of different ways to go about shadowing, so we just want to give you like different examples. So presentation / posters is one activity type, and publications is another activity type, and you have some flexibility. So I did presentation / publications as the name of my activity type, or as the name of my activity, and I put it under publications for the activity type. And that was just because like you only have 15 slots, and like I needed to combine it. And so this one, in October 2019, I presented at the Empowering Rural Women's Leadership Session at the Rural Women's Summit as the youngest speaker at the event. I gave a presentation on my vision for rural women's leadership, emphasizing the value of mentorship in my journey as a female leader in a rural community. So that one is a lot of like just, it's a presentation. They just need to know like what you did, when you did it. And then I hyped myself up because I was the youngest speaker at the event. So I just, did a little bit of hyping myself up there. And then the second part is totally different experience. So this is an example of how I combined two different experiences. So then in August 2019, I was published as a co-author. And then I just listed the publication. And so like looking back at this, like I'm like, makes sense to put things like logical order. So I probably should have put August 1st, then October, but like it's so minuscule, and we got into medical school, so it doesn't matter. But this is just an example. Like if you have two things that like, I didn't really want to write about like a full description on my presentation because it was a one-day presentation, and I had an activity on my research. So I didn't need to talk about my research again here. So just combine those for those 700 characters.
Yeah, absolutely. Love it. I also did combining. I think I have some examples here, but I also combined. Okay, so now we would talk about teaching and tutoring, which I know a lot of people definitely have. So this is two different activity entries. This first one is within the Gemstone Leadership Program. And this was combining, this was a couple semesters. So me being a TA, and then also me being on the steering committee, where that was like overseeing the TAs and overseeing the curriculum. So here's how I kind of like talked about all of that put together. So I said, what will be the societal impact of your research? I asked a class of 10 first-year Gemstone Honor Program students. I had the privilege of leading the program's introductory course, where I served as a mentor and teacher. I entered the program with no prior research experience and was intimidated. And this made me passionate to ensure that each of my students felt empowered to pursue the research questions they cared most about. As a steering committee member, I helped TAs feel confident to lead their classes. I'm most proud to have advocated for and helped develop changes to the curriculum to increase the focus on equity and the societal impact of each research project. So I definitely loved this research or this description because when I reflect back on my time, again, I start with the reflections, really like what impacted me the most was exactly this, like teaching the students, but also like really increasing our focus on like societal impact. And so like when I came into this program, it's a 4-year research program. It definitely was still like hefty on like the STEM side. And we really work to have people think about like whatever research problem you have, focusing on like whatever change you want to see in the world and then encouraging them to pursue that. It's like when I came in, I had did my first year like little research paper on like health disparities in maternal health. But I didn't pursue that because I was intimidated, like I said, and I was like, oh, no one else is doing health disparity stuff. I'm like, this is going to get shot down, blah, blah, blah. So then as a TA, I was like, I'm empowering them to go ahead and do those projects. And now we have a lot of projects that are really more like on a social side. Anyways, this is all irrelevant, but it's not irrelevant, but it's extra. But basically that's why I wrote this description in this way. And again, I was able to then describe it. And then for my second one, this is also combining two. So this is supplemental instructor for biology as well as organic chemistry tutor. So I didn't have space to write two separate ones. So I'm like teaching, tutoring combined. So passionate about helping other students achieve academic success. Like I said, someone is tutor, instructor, tutor, provide support to first generation or low income students. I revisited concepts from lecture in a personalized and engaging way. With each student, I shared how I openly faced my own struggles when I took the course and gave them study tips and encouragement. I talked about my vulnerability, empowering students, and then giving them hope and optimism. So it was a lot. Like I tutored a lot of different students. And so it's hard to kind of like combine all of that. But for me, again, when I reflected back, I think the most difference was like, especially tutoring organic chemistry, which is such a weed out class that so many students go through so much. Like I went into Orgo like already shaking before my first day of class. Because I was like, I'm about to fail. Like I see no other option but fail online everywhere I look. Pre-med Reddit, get off of there, like everything, like, you know. And so for me, like that's why I became a tutor. And I think especially like being a Black woman and being a tutor, where like they could see that representation and they'd come in, I'd be like, girl, I got an A and you can too. Let's do it. Breaking stuff down. So again, that's what was meaningful to me. And that's what I tried to convey.
Sorry, I will say also like teaching and tutoring, I think is one of the main categories that I see a lot of people combining as well, because if you tutor for like 5 different subjects, like the skills that you learn different, but a lot of them are similar as well. So that's definitely where I see a lot of things kind of overlapping and people combining.
Yeah, great. Love tutoring. Okay, so that's the end of our descriptions. Honestly, I have more, but we didn't want to like talk at you for like an hour. But we'll definitely drop the link. I just posted a blog that goes over my entire application. I break down each activity description. So there's a couple more like research. There's more leadership. Like I said, I have a ton of leadership. Maybe like a couple other like stuff. But yeah, I found it so helpful, like so helpful to read other people's descriptions and get ideas. And so that's why like me, Morgan, will putting our stuff out there. Yeah, I'll let you wrap up as well, Morgan, before we hop in.
Yeah, so I shared 14 out of my 15. The one that I didn't share on my Instagram was my honors and awards. And so you got to see it tonight. So what I will also do is make sure that I start kind of like dropping those down there. And I also do have a couple of examples from like my TMD SAS, which are a little bit more straightforward because you have a little bit of a shorter time frame. But yeah, so I will jump into letters of recommendation. Maybe while I'm talking about letters of recommendation, Kyeisha will drop her link, and then, you know, we'll kind of like switch over, and then I'll make sure to drop my links in the chat so you guys can save those. So letters of recommendation, they're kind of crazy because technically they're a part of the primary application in the sense that like you send your letters of recommendation to AMCAS, or like your professors submit them to AMCAS. But they're a part of the secondary application in the sense that you don't need all of your letters of recommendation to submit your primary application. So you can submit, be verified, and then your letter writers can submit their letters of recommendation, and you can apply those to different schools. And then schools will actually look at your letters of recommendation during your secondary application phase. So if you're kind of like wondering, when should I get my letters of recommendation? You want to get your letters of recommendation and have those in, I would say about 2 weeks before you're planning on submitting your secondary application. So that timeline looks just a little bit different for everybody, but that is what I would generally recommend. Sorry, I opened like Safari. Now my computer's freaking out, so I'm just going to close Safari so my computer can breathe. But who wrote my letters of recommendation? So I had 7 letters of recommendation total. I got a physician that I had been working with for 1 year at the time, and I continued working with him. So worked with him for a total of 2 years, but I was his student intern. 3 science professors. I got my cell bio professor, who I actually took his course the spring of my junior year. So I took his course starting in January, and I asked him for a letter in about March. And we built a great relationship even via Zoom. And so he was more than willing to write me an letter of recommendation. We like still keep in touch. He wrote me like a paragraph long email when I got accepted to medical school and everything. I got a biochem professor and then also an orgo professor. And I was like unsure of like, if I didn't really trust one of my professors to send my letter of recommendation in on time. So that's why I actually had 3 science professors, because I just wanted to have a backup. So I know my professor, and I know like the kind of person that he is, so I didn't trust him. And then I had 1 non-science professor who also counted as a professor in my major, since I'm health science. And then I had a mentor who also served as my boss for the health professions advising, and then another mentor slash my boss who was my boss for the summer leadership program that I did. So of course I had 7 letters in total. So all of these didn't go to every school. Some schools have like a max of 6. So I sent them like 6, which excluded one of my science professors, but other schools will say, I just want 2 science and 1 non-science professor, that kind of thing. So I just like sent whatever letters the school preferred.
Right. So we have 2 different like experiences here. So my school does a committee letter. So for those who aren't familiar, if you go to school that has one, you probably are familiar, but I'll still say, so the committee letter is like, instead of me having to send in individual letters, my pre-health advising office creates a letter for me. And that letter includes like, I haven't read it, but from what I understand, it first is like an evaluation of you as a pre-medical student written by one of the pre-med advisors that goes over like your research experience, your clinical experience, all your different experiences, who you are as a person, what they know about you, etc. And then it's followed by, I had up to 6 letters that I could send in for my committee letter. And that all combined goes into the schools. So on MCAS, I only had like 1 entry, and then that was sent out to all the schools, but that 1 entry was like 7 letters, I guess you would say. So for my committee letter, I had to submit a committee packet that ended up being like 19 pages long. They asked you a bunch of questions that it actually prepares you for the primary and the secondary. And I had to write descriptions of all my different experiences. Tell me about the time you faced a challenge. Tell me about a leadership experience, like all of that. And then I had to go through a mock interview. And that is all to be to get that committee letter. So all of that went into it first, on top of everything else. When I think back at it, I'm like, yo, there was so much going on.
Yeah, I didn't have to do any of that.
It was a lot, but I think it was worth it because when I was doing secondaries, I was able to pull it back up. But it was a lot. You take it step by step, guys. You take it step by step. So for the letters that I asked for, I had one physician / research mentor who was my mentor for my summer experience. And I also shadowed him. I had 2 science professors. Actually, to jump on Morgan's point, I actually asked for 8 letters, I think, just to have some extras. And then it came down and I decided who I was going to send. So I asked 3 professors in general. Ended up sending one who was a cell bio, and then my research mentor for Gemstone, so he was my mentor for 3 years. And that actually counts as science professor. I remember asking my pre-med advisor so many times, I was like, I never took a class with him, but I took Gemstone classes with him, which was basically us like doing our research, doing our thesis, and that counted. So it was a class. Like, anyways, you can get into more specifics with whatever your situation is. And then
I'll know whenever you're done.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So I would also like check and see the schools that you're applying to. So some schools will say a professor that has taught you in a classroom setting. So like if your school doesn't have a class for your research and you're just doing your research as an extracurricular activity or as a paid position, that would not count in that situation if the school says for them to have taught you in a classroom setting. So there's just like a couple of nuances.
Yeah, definitely check. Like I was like so stressed about it. And I think that's why I had an extra letter as backup. But yeah, in my case, I think because it was such like a program, like anyways, then I had one non-science professor, a mentor boss for Gemstone leadership stuff that I did. And then I had the same summer research program that I did. Actually, the director of the research program wrote me a letter, who's also director of research at that medical school. So I was like, oh, okay, that was a pretty sweet letter to get, not gonna lie. And my tip with that is just like, I always tell this to everyone, but like, just always, whenever you're in a room, like you never know, like, even though he was like the director, we actually connected because he's also from the Caribbean. But just then from there, like staying connected with people afterwards, just sending random email updates like, hey, hope you're doing well. Here's what I have going on. Yeah. And then in the end, it's like, okay, he's offered to write me a letter. So go in it just to make like relationships, and you never know, is what I'll say about that. But yeah, so I've already seen some questions about letters, so we can try our best to answer those. Anything else about letters?
I don't think so.
Okay, then let's wrap it up.
Yes. So now we're going to just jump into when to apply. And as we get to this last slide, make sure you drop all your questions in the Q&A, and then make sure that you also start upvoting any questions that you really like. So that way we can see like which questions are super popular, and that'll help us like kind of go through them later. But yeah, the biggest question is like, okay, now I know everything to do for my primary application. When should I actually submit my primary application? So we're going to give you two different examples of how people submitted their primary applications. And we're still going to our top choices. So I was super, super early, kind of had like everything done. So I submitted my primary application on May 27th. I sent my transcripts virtually on May 3rd. So that was the day that the application opened last cycle. And all three of my schools that I needed transcripts for all use like Parchment or National Student Clearinghouse. So those were all electronic. So MCAS received them all by May the 5th. I was verified on May 28th. So literally the day after I submitted, it was insane. All of my secondaries were complete by the end of July. And my first interview was on August the 20th.
Yeah. So Morgan has the amazing example of like submitting on the first day. And I think we both give the same advice though, which is submit when you're ready. Like
yeah, 100%.
She was ready, right. She was ready on the first day. So submit so you can go enjoy your summer. Like,
yeah, but I didn't like, same thing. Like I didn't submit my TMD-SAS application on the first day because like I wasn't ready. So, and that worked out for me as well. So definitely wait until you're ready.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I was ready on June 4th. And a lot of that was because my flight back home to St. Martin was June 5th. And so that was the ultimate motivation because I was like, I'm not working on my medical school application. This is my first time going home, spent with family, all that. So that helped me to like wrap it up. I was like, it's good. So
gotta get her done.
So, but I wasn't verified until the end of July. So people were always like, wait, what? So my amazing university sends transcripts by mail. And I was also like graduating, so I had to wait until my grades were posted, and then I requested them right after that. And so I don't know what was going on with AMCAS, but they didn't mark it as received until June 22nd.
They had a lot of issues with like COVID and like mail transcripts. It was a mess.
It was stressing me out because like if you look at the date on their email, like it was sent on June 8th, but it wasn't marked as received until June 22nd. And then I entered the verification process. So basically my application was on hold until June 22nd. So that was actually like, you consider me submitting then. And you'll hear a lot that verification will take 4 weeks. I think their website says 6 to 8 weeks. You'll see here from June 22nd, verified on July 25th. So about a month. And after that, I started getting secondaries. And so they were complete within about 2 weeks, which was mid-August. And I had my first interview in September. So I do like to say this story because like going through this process, I definitely was stressed. I was about to curse. I was stressed out because like, wait,
it's recorded.
No, but I definitely was stressing because I'm like, you hear all this stuff like, don't be late, don't be late. And I was like, I tried to be early and I'm there literally sitting in St. Martin and I kept checking every morning I would check and be like, But yeah, obviously I turned out fine. If I could go back, I would have told myself to chill out. And so I just mentioned this, like apply when you're ready. Here's a timeline of like what it might look like. If you apply in June, you might apply in July. Just the earlier is better. So you're doing the things now. You're at this webinar today because you're trying to get ready. Do the best that you can. And then once it's submitted, don't be like me trying to check it out every day. Like it's in God's hands at that point. It
really is. And we don't trust the ANC. They do what they be wanting to. So like, it just kind of happens. But one thing that I will say that Kyeisha did, so you waited on all of your grades to be posted for the spring semester. So my recommendation is if your school ends later, or if they do mail transcripts, if you don't need those spring semester grades to like give you a GPA boost, if your GPA is going to be the same, you can go ahead and like send your transcripts without those spring grades. Yeah, so that's just another idea because like I don't, some people might have schools that go into like the middle of June, or mail transcripts are just always like a mess. So, but either way, it worked out, which was amazing.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's definitely something that my pre-med advisors told me, like just to wait for my grades. And again, I still turned out fine, but it's so great to like figure out these things and be like, oh, I can do that. And then the decision's up to you and like, your advisors and stuff. But yeah, so hopefully that helps. So we got a lot of questions about like when to apply and like what's considered early, what's considered late. It's really hard to say. Like I think everyone's experience is just going to be different.
Yeah.
So just like apply when you're ready.
100%.
Grace, we made it till the end.
Yes. Sorry. So we made it to the end. Now we're going to move into the Q&A. So if you want to stop sharing your screen so we can just focus on our beautiful faces. Um, and we will kind of jump into the questions. So we'll kind of go back and forth. We'll be answering some like typing out, but we'll also try to answer as many as possible live. So, okay, let's start with this one. I put my clinical volunteering in my personal statement. Should I use that for my activities too? What would you say?
I would say yes. I did the same thing. I talked about the Pregnancy Aid Center in my personal statement as well as my primary application. I just make sure to do like two different stories. So not repeating the exact same thing. The personal statement's why medicine. And so whatever reasons you have for that, it might be the same as an activity that you did.
I 100% agree. I don't want to read your personal statement and then read your activity section and feel like I'm reading the same exact experience. So don't share like the same exact story. But definitely, like if it's important to you, then it goes in both.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I like this next one. How do you ensure that you honor your passions for patient advocacy without presenting a public health or social work application? I feel like my application's reading like two different applicant applications.
Yeah, I think this one is a really hard one. And I think like whether you like try to or not, your application will probably have like a theme if you're just like super passionate about something. So like my theme in my application was 100% public health. You saw it in my vaccine outreach program, but like you've been on our personal statement chat, like I am literally a public health major, super passionate about that, did all my research in public health. And so I actually was asked in one of my interviews, like I was just like going on about my research and he's like, so why not just get your PhD in public health? And I was like, hold on, I'm here for medical school. I mean, so I really had to, focus like, I want to really like combine my interests. And I felt like just having a PhD in public health and being able to do research, that's not really going to give me the patient care aspect and like understanding of like, like what are the issues specifically within the healthcare system rather than like public health issues. So I really wanted to combine those two. And I said it like a lot better in my interview. But I think, if you're focusing a lot on advocacy or public health or social work, you want to always relate those endeavors back to medicine and how you want to use those as a physician.
I agree 100%. That was like the perfect question for you. And I'll just broaden it a little bit to you if you're passionate in other areas, like, again, you do what you're passionate about, and then you're going to put that on your application. So like I mentioned, a lot of leadership. But I think that's where the personal statement was so important to make sure I conveyed my why. Because I didn't just do all things related to medicine, but that's okay. And then I kind of connected to, once I got the secondary questions, I talked about what I want to do in the future. You saw that I have some of those same passions that I want to do as a doctor. So it all still ties in. So yeah, who you are as a person, like in all of those things, it does go into medicines. Like Morgan said, just make sure that you're explaining that, but also get ready for those questions during interviews. And I definitely got some of those as well. So.
Awesome. The next question that I will answer, how do you calculate hours? Do you add until you would matriculate? And so I'm actually pulling out the AMCAS guide right now because they actually like did change this. And so I just want to make sure that I am saying the right thing. But for the AMCAS activities, you actually will do like all of your completed hours. So that's like up until, I want to say it's May of the application year. And then they have a separate section for anticipated hours. So this year, those are actually divided out. So if you look at our applications, they were all combined, but it's something that they've changed. And I think that's really good. So schools can see like, what have you done up until this point? And then what are the hours that you plan to do? And so, yeah. May 2022 is the last day that you can put hours that you have completed, and then or June or July, like whenever you submit your application, and then any other hours that you're planning to do during the year that you apply, you would put those as anticipated hours, so they're separate.
Great. Yeah, it's super cool that you realized that they were changing that. I didn't know. Let's see. Okay, this person said, if I have similar leadership roles like treasurer in different organizations, should I include all of those or just one? So I think it's definitely going to be up to you a little bit, but what I would say is like different organizations have different missions, right? And then I think for me, I definitely went in, like I said, each experience that I knew I wanted to include, like reflecting on like the impact and things like that. So I guess I'd be like, if they're totally different organizations and the similar thing is that you're treasurer, then I can imagine that your description is going to end up being something like a whole lot of what you did in skills, right? Like as treasurer of XYZ organization, I balance books, blah, 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 blah. Like it'll be harder to actually talk about impact and stories. So I think that's something to consider. If you're really out of space, it's going to be up to you if you think you can like combine and then maybe like really expand on one of those organizations. But I think I would also ask, then I'd be like, well, why are you in all these different organizations and you only want to talk about one of them, right? So yeah, I think it's a little tricky of obviously not knowing exactly what these organizations are, but consider those things as you make that decision is what I would say.
Awesome. Okay, let me find a good question because I was actually answering a question. I was answering some questions, like typing them out.
Yeah.
Okay, question that we have. 2 questions. Do we need a non-science professor letter / I do not have a non-science professor, but a non-science related supervisor. Letter will be a part of the committee process at Maryland. Is that bad? So I will kind of answer these together. Do you need a non-science professor letter? It depends. Depends on the schools that you're applying to. I will say that there are a good bit of schools that like, if you're not doing a committee letter, because like committee letter is like a whole different process. Usually schools are like, if you have a committee letter, perfect, amazing. And then if you don't have a committee letter and your schools ask for separate letters, then a lot of schools will ask for a non-science professor. And if your schools ask specifically for a non-science professor, you need a non-science professor. So yeah, don't try to play with the schools. Just try to get what they ask for.
Yeah. I'm typing this one out, but I'll just answer it quickly. Should activities be chronological order? What you feel is most important? MCAS is going to automatically order them for you, and they're in reverse chronological order. So most recent is at the top.
And Kyeisha, do you want to just answer kind of like committee letters? Do they count as separate letters or is it just as one? Did you follow like the school's max letter recommendations or just include however many your school's committee asks?
Yeah, definitely. So when you go on a lot of the school's websites and read the fine print, I guess, on their letters, you'll see like they'll say like blah, 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 all these are required. And then there's like, if you have a committee letter, ignore everything. Like the committee letter trumps all of those other roles and it includes that. So I just need the committee letter. I will mention something I did not know. I was literally like in December, so like midway through my application cycle when I was asked to include a letter from my current PI of my current gap year job. And I was like, oh, can I do that? Like it's already in the application. And it turns out you can. I just went and was able to add another letter at that point. So this is kind of like my additional letter outside of the committee letter. And then it was sent to all the schools and I let them know instead of an update letter, I basically had an additional letter of recommendation. But when you're first applying, I think you don't really need to do that. Just go with the committee letter, but know that you might have the opportunity to like maybe submit another letter.
Yeah. And there are also like some schools, and this is also looking at just like the general letter of recommendation requirements, because my school did not do a committee letter. Like I think it was like Hopkins, but like I had one school that was like, if you've done research experience and have a publication, or if you're applying to the MD PhD program, we want to see a letter from your research mentor. And so like a lot of schools will have their specific requirements. So if your school doesn't have a committee letter, just make sure that you look at those. But if your school does, like the committee letter kind of like trumps everything in that situation. So do y'all recommend having your work activities descriptions looked over by other people? I would say absolutely. I kind of like I got a lot of edits on my activity section, less than my personal statement, but like probably still about 4 edits on them. And so I just used like the same person for like my first couple of edits. And then once I had a really solid draft, I used an accepted medical student initially. Once I had a really solid draft, I just got a second set of eyes on it, because I just always think like not just one person should read it, just because like people have different experiences and perspectives. And so like one person might interpret something differently. So it's always good to have 2 sets of eyes on any document, I would say.
Yeah, and then I'll just add in, I also did peer editing. So actually, fun fact, Morgan and I edited each other's, actually, I don't know if I looked at yours. You looked at mine. You edited my primary application. And look at us.
It was amazing. I was like, this girl's getting everywhere. I need to go work mine.
I'm done. But yeah, no, I literally like, yeah, she edited mine. I was helping to edit peers as well. Because again, you don't need to be like I don't know, even us, we just got accepted to medical school and stuff. Like we're teaching you guys what we learned throughout the process. But as you're going through it, you're also picking up tips and tricks from your mentor or this resource. So you guys can help each other, which I highly, highly recommend. Because again, it's just looking over things, does this sound right? Helping
We might
people
have to help facilitate that. We'll chat about it after this.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, that's a great, great question. Okay, do you see any more? I feel like you're good at picking out the questions. I'm so
Okay,
like,
let me look. Okay. Hold
actually, this
on.
was interesting. So this one asks, would you recommend including need-based scholarship awards like the Pell Grant under the honor awards section? And my gut is telling me that I would not.
That's what my gut is telling me as well.
Yeah.
It's like something that, like, honestly, like if you're eligible for the Pell Grant, it's the same thing like President's List. The Pell Grant is if you have like a certain amount of income, and like schools are in your application, you put your family income, and then later, like when they're considering scholarships, they're not gonna like give you a scholarship just because you had the Pell Grant. And I want to say it's mostly need based. So I personally would not do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think with everything, it's like I would think, okay, if I put that, it would be to let people know, like, I guess a caveat would be if you wanted to include it, but you're kind of trying to write about how that scholarship impacted you, and maybe like talking about, needing aid, like, or working through school, or some kind of story, because the application really is for you to talk about yourself and talk
Maybe
about
also could work in the disadvantage statement. I'm thinking,
yeah.
why are we the same?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. And yes, I don't think either of us, I decided not to write a disadvantage statement. So we don't have any advice on doing that specifically, but it sounds like if you want to talk about like needing need-based aid and like kind of those things, it could go there as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm seeing a couple different questions that I'm going to combine. Like, how do you talk about activities that you have planned? And how do you talk about kind of your gap year activities and things like that? So MCAS now, they allow you to like include activities that like you haven't started, kind of like planned activities rather than like just completed versus anticipated hours. I would use my activities section to talk about activities that I've already done or am currently doing, just because when you think about writing 700 characters, I think it's a lot easier to write about like the impact of an activity that you have already completed. When it comes about activities that you're planning to do, especially if you're taking a gap year, a lot of schools will ask about this in your secondary applications. And so it's a really great way to talk about in your secondary applications. And if you have something that's like really cool that's coming up in the next year and you already have 15 activities filled, I would just 100% wait. And then it's like, it gives you something easy to write about in an update letter when you're like waiting on an interview or like in between interview and decision. So unless you're applying through TMD-SAS is a totally different ballgame. You talk about all your planned activities, but it's easy to write 300 characters. So AMCAS, I would just say write about activities that you've already completed. And yeah. Anything else you want to add to that?
No, because I also didn't know that they changed that. So
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I kind of just answered one too about asking about starting doing additional shadowing in the summer. And I think someone else was asking about like upcoming activities. So yeah, so as I mentioned, you have secondaries. Secondaries are I was talking like about someone today about secondaries. They're very, very under talked about, and they are a lot. And I'm sure we're going to do some kind of like maybe session on secondaries. I know I want to get a blog out, but you have a lot to write, like, and there's just so much space.
They be having like questions that are like, tell me anything else you want to tell me.
Yeah, exactly. 500 characters, go ahead.
Right.
So, yeah, definitely. I would say for primary, no, like as you're thinking about stuff, like, oh shoot, I want to say it's not your like, the doors closed, you're never going to be able to talk to the school again. So you can include in secondaries and then update letters. So yeah, just to mention that, I think that might answer a couple questions in here.
Great. Hold on, I'm typing a response to a question. Okay, I'm going to say this while I'm talking. So if you have a research project, but it has not been published, but is in the process of being published and the abstract has been approved, can you put in your activities list? Yes. In this situation, what I would do is list it as research. And then at the end, so you talk about like your research experience, what you've done, and then you could just say like, we're in the process of submitting this paper for publication, or you can just say the abstract for this paper has been approved for publication. That's what I would do, just because like until it's signed on the dotted line, published, don't say it's published. So I would just include that like as a final sentence in the research activity.
Great. So next question is about hours, sufficient hours. So they said, how many hours are sufficient for a meaningful experience? Would 40 hours look bad? I think this one's also like, it's hard to say. You can't tell, like, there's no, like I said, the very first thing I was saying was like, there's no formula
No.
at all. So like, for example, one of my most meaningful and one of like the bulk of my clinical experiences was the Pregnancy Aid Center. And I was talked about my personal statement. It was one of the most meaningful. I had a total of 80 hours there. Again, I didn't even hit 100. Like, and looking at that, it's like, okay, well, that sounds like apparently compared to like hundreds of hours to here, thousands of hours. Again, that's why I felt nervous going in because I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't rack up like all these hours. But I think with everything in life, like it's not about these like labels, like it's not about just a number. It's about like impact and how meaningful it was, as well as time spent. So this was something I started before the pandemic, and then you had obviously the pandemic, and then getting back to it. But I was going each and every single week. And I think they also saw that, okay, well, here's other things that are also taking up where she's also spending her time. So it's not like my whole application was full of things that were, you know, below 100 hours over the course of 4 years. So yeah, I don't know what goes, at the end of the day, it's a human reading your application. And I think give them enough context that they can read and like through your description, understand like, okay, I understand why this is so meaningful and stuff like that. I think that's why no questions are raised about it. In my case. So I just want to say that because again, I know especially hearing like, oh, they're going to these top schools. For me personally, 80 hours and it was most meaningful. It probably would have been maybe something like 200 without the pandemic because I was planning to do it over the summer, life, you know. But yeah, so that was my hours. Again, there's no like stamp to tell like what whether or not to make it most meaningful.
Awesome.
It's a lot of questions.
I know there's so many. Okay, do you mind saying your science GPA, cumulative GPA, and MCAT scores? Sure, this is the easy one. My cumulative and science GPA was a 4.0. My MCAT score was a 519.
Yeah, my cumulative and science were 3.98 and my MCAT was 515.
Amazing. Okay, we have so many questions.
Yeah. Do we have the thing where they can like upvote? Like I
know I'm like not seeing any upvotes.
I don't see it. Then maybe Zoom updated. Like
probably.
We're trying.
Yeah, just give us like a second. We're trying
to. Okay. Here's a good one.
Okay. Also, I'm gonna start just answering some of them like we already answered and just type so we can like get rid of those.
Yeah, awesome. And also we're gonna try to focus on things that are like primary application first. So how important is it to include a physician letter? If you've established more meaningful relationships with research/work activities, would that be preferred than the physician letter? This one I'm not sure. I think medical schools like if you have a physician letter, but that's me being like the pre-med, just giving the random like med schools like
right,
this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not on admissions. I'm excited. I don't know about you, Morgan, but I'm excited like once I'm in school to like get involved with the admissions side of things.
Oh my God. No, literally Dean Rivera, he's the Dean of Admissions at NYU. And like when he was still trying to recruit me, I was on a Zoom with him. He's like, I hope you come and work with us in admissions next year. And I was like, buddy, already secured. No,
honestly, it'll be really, really amazing to be on the other side. And like, of course, anyways, that's a whole different discussion, but also just having that representation on that side, like, and looking out. But yeah, anyway, so I think like med schools like physician letters. I know for me, I felt really fortunate where I was like, oh, I have this research mentor who is a physician who I did shadow. I'm like, oh my gosh, amazing. I felt really privileged to have a letter. I would say, I mean, you have 6 letters. If you can include those people and the physician, at the same time, you need strong letters. So don't just get a letter and then from a physician and then it's like a paragraph long and like they really don't have anything to say about you. Ooh, that's worse than not having a letter at all.
This is resonating with me. Right? I'm sorry, it's resonating with me. Just let me share. Okay. Yeah. So I had this one physician, like shadowed him and I'm like 2 hours in and he's like, if you need a letter of recommendation, like I'm more than willing to write you one. And like a lot of physicians do this because I know that like some people will shadow just to get a letter of recommendation. And while like if I had a school that required a physician letter and like nobody else had offered to write me one, like I probably would have taken them up on that because I would have been able to just like get a letter. Mm-hmm. However, that was not going to be a strong letter because Buddy does not know me. like, okay, yeah, Morgan was attentive and shadowing. Like, that's all the capacity that he knows me. And like, this was sophomore year. So like, yeah, I could have like worked harder to establish a meaningful relationship if I wanted him to write a letter. However, I only had one school that actually required a physician letter of recommendation. And so some of my schools only said like 3 letters, two science, 1 non-science. And so I didn't even get to send my physician letter. But I think it's really important to consider like the quality of your letters for all of them. And so like my physician that I worked for a year, he could talk about how I developed the vaccine outreach program, how I jumped in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Like I was in and out in the trenches with this man, like on the weekends doing free COVID testing for our community. So like he knew me like as a person. I knew that letter was strong compared to like someone that I shadowed for like 6 hours.
Yeah, that's amazing. And someone didn't even ask that, but I'm so glad we got to touch on that because I was speaking and I was like, wait, this is an important point to bring up. Other than that, like we said, we're not on admissions to tell you like for sure you need this type of letter. But I think as students, what you can do at least is just get the strongest letters that you can. And I think that's setting yourself up for success.
Absolutely. Okay. Do presentations have to be science/research based? No. So you can see in mine, like mine was literally about rural women's leadership. Talked about like 4-H and cooking competitions and mentoring and things like that. So remember, everything doesn't have to be like science research based. Even your research doesn't have to be like lab research or like science research. If you're interested in, let me not say psychology, because psychology is, for the purposes of the application, it's not science, but in general it is science. But like if you have like, I can't think of what's the subject that's not science. So I was about to say math, but technically that's included in the BCPM GPA. History. If you do history research, like that's research. It doesn't just have to be science research. So yeah.
Great.
Yeah, there's just like a common question. If you do research, like you can, if I didn't have my other presentation, I would have just included my publication in my research experience. So like if you have research, it's okay to include the publication or the presentation in that same experience, just FYI. If you have issues with getting shadowing, virtual shadowing is very abundant.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think, okay.
Yeah, I'm just going through them.
We won't really answer a lot of questions like when you should submit your application. So we kind of went through that, and then it's also just like really when you're prepared.
Yeah, I also saw 2 questions now related to MCAT scores and submitting. But I know for me personally, well, both of us actually, we definitely had our MCATs before. So I don't have personal advice on waiting for an MCAT score and like submitting to one school.
Yeah.
Let me read the question though, just get full context.
I will just put Ashley_medical. She's great. She made a post about this. She's on Instagram and she actually works on the admissions committee at her school.
Oh,
so
awesome.
I would check out her post and refer all those questions to her because she actually knows more things about admissions. And at the end of the day, we don't know what order schools review your applications in. We don't know if you're waiting on MCAT or if they look at it. Like it's literally different for every school. So whenever you're ready to submit your application, submit that thing.
Yeah, great. That sounds like a great resource. So yeah, definitely. I don't like to speak on things that I like didn't experience because all I'm doing is talk about my experiences, man. Like that's all. People, okay, so I've gotten 2 questions now about putting hobbies as 0 hours. Some person said that they've seen people start a hobby as a child and then just put it at 0. And now someone else asked that as well.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Okay, I have not seen that.
Yeah, so hold on, got to look at my handy dandy AMCAS application right here because we always gotta,
refer to the guide.
So I actually calculated my hours for couponing, but I know people that are like, I did gymnastics since I was 3 years old and I was in the gym for 100 hours a week when I was a child. And so, I mean, I think that's fine. Hobbies and then honors and awards are like the 2 places where I think 0 hours are okay. But like if you put 0 hours for a hobby, I would just kind of explain like you started this in childhood and like an average of like the hours that you committed every week, because that is kind of weird. But honors and awards, I think it is like totally normal.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, is being executive VP of student council help in the medical application at all? we're not on admissions committee. I can't tell you what's going to help, what's going to hurt. But I will say you should include things on the application that are important to you and that show who you are as a person. That is the most important thing to include.
Absolutely.
And also to have clinical experience, please.
Yeah.
That's like the one thing that's like really like
only checkbox, I think. I agree.
No, literally. And I want to say non-negotiable, but I bet somebody's gotten in without it, like just to spite me. But like you want to have clinical experience. Everything else.
Yeah, completely. And the way I look at it too is like, I didn't sign up for these roles thinking like, oh, this is for my medical school application. Like,
no, literally.
I did it because I wanted to. And so when it came down to like we talked about, I just reflecting what was meaningful to me, was meaningful to who I am as a person and what I'm passionate about. And that's what made onto the application. There were some additional things I've done that didn't make it on just because of space. But
no, there, yeah.
On there. I want to answer this one. It's unrelated, but I think it'll be fun. They say, congratulations to both of you on successful application cycles. Would you be open to sharing why you chose your specific school to enroll?
Yes. Okay, so I'm like obsessed with NYU. Are we talking about undergrad or med school?
I think med school.
Okay, good. I was like, I don't want to like give a whole spiel and then like so I'm actually obsessed with NYU. It is literally perfect. It's kind of like crazy to like look back at the application cycle and think about it was a school that I honestly almost did not apply to because like I felt like it was out of my reach and like a school that I would never get into. And then I was like, what the heck, free tuition, throw it in there. But what really drew me to NYU is like just like the connection that I got from the moment I got in. So I got in October, and like since then, like literally like emailing back and forth with the dean of admissions every day. Like I email him one question and he's like, let me set you up with the residency director, let me set you up with the current student, let me set you up with the director of this program. And everybody that I talked to was like, here's my phone number, text me if you ever need anything. And so I think just like really the support that they provided. They had a really good Spanish program. We actually do like OSCEs, which are like standardized patient encounters in Spanish with patients if we are doing their Spanish program, which was really important to me. They set me up with my own like Black physician mentor before I even committed to their school. They have a minority mentorship program, which I think was huge. And I think the biggest thing for me was the transparency. You will see, and this is not specific to any school, but you will see as you go through the application cycle, you might be talking to some people and you're like, can you tell me one thing that you don't like about your school? And they're like, oh, everything's amazing. Like, it's so perfect. And I'm like, no, like med school's hard. There's got to be like something that you don't like. The transparency at NYU was like unmatched. Like when I went for revisit, like literally had like a 3-hour conversation with students, like no faculty present. They all went through and talked about like why they chose it, what they would change. Like NYU is in the news because it's an institution and there's issues, but one thing their students are going to do is protest. And I'm trying to be out there protesting. I don't want to be at a space where people are comfortable suffering in silence. And then also, the last thing is training at Bellevue. Training at Bellevue is, it's a safety net hospital for the tri-state area. So I'm going to see people that don't have insurance, don't have primary care providers, and like just being that big of a safety net hospital, it's like the training that you get there is pretty unmatched. So yeah, it's a really special place and I'm excited.
So exciting. That's why I wanted to answer the question. I feel like this is like our treat of like
no, literally. And I was like, I just love my school. It's amazing.
No, it's exciting. I'm so excited for all of you to get to the point, and you're just like gushing over your new home for the next 4 to 5 years or 8 years or whatever, whatever program you're doing. So reasons why I chose Harvard. I think it also like there's kind of that gut feeling, like all the schools are exciting, and then like the one that I end up choosing, looking back, I'm like, yeah, there was that feeling like from the jump. Also almost did not apply. Like really, like the day I got my interview invite, I saw Harvard pop on my email and I thought it was a rejection because I was like, no, you could not tell me that I was gonna get in. Like it's insane. But this just another reminder as you guys are applying and about to put schools on your list, like don't let that self-doubt. I'm about to get emotional, like, but do not let that self-doubts like stop you from putting a school on your list. Like go for it. Definitely go for it. So anyways, reasons why I chose Harvard. I think for me, it was definitely like the students and the faculty. So like they're my favorite classmates, like of all the potential classmates I was getting to know, like just being with peers that I thought were like inspiring me. And I was like, wow, everyone is like so passionate, like so amazing, and we just connected so well. Something else I really love, kind of like with your point, like protesting, was like we all kind of immediately came in and was like, okay, entering such like a historic institution and Ivy Tower and stuff, especially as a minority or any other type of marginalized identity, we were just like, honestly, we all formed a group chat and we we're like, are we going to do this or not? Because I'm not trying to enter a space that I'm not going to actually excel at. I want to be at a place where I'm going to thrive. And so like we really did our research, and like, but I also appreciate the fact that I'm like, wait, my potential classmates are all thinking the same as me, where we're like, we have certain things that we want to do and people that we want to serve, and making sure that we're able to do that at Harvard. So we all were like on the same wavelength. Other things I love is the curriculum. So it's very, very flexible. Not going to get into all of that, but I felt like it just really, really fit me, the types of schools or hospitals I could be rotating at. And then I think just like the opportunities, like just seemed absolutely endless. And especially wanting to get involved in like global health or public health, or like for me, just having this vision of like really like representing my island and being able to do stuff back home for my island. I just felt like going to a school like Harvard and the doors that would open would really be able to pay off years down the line when I'm like trying to change my island for the best, trying to change the world. Honestly, I was like, think big. But I love, I think I'm a person who's always had big dreams, and then this is the school that's gonna like allow me to dream big and like really celebrates that. So those are some of the reasons I'm excited. I really do hope, medicine's really, really hard. It's going to be a lot, but I hope that we are, with the schools that we chose, we are going to be able to like still be able to dream and do things that we're passionate about and make the change that we want to see in the world, while also, dealing with STEP and clinicals and all that stuff. But anyways, we'll head back to you guys now, but thank you for asking that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we love talking about our future medical schools. Yeah, I feel like a lot of the questions here, so like MCAT, personal statement, which we did some like webinars on both of those, so definitely go check those out. I'm gonna do like a final scan to see what other questions there are. My only clinical experience includes caregiver and hospice working directly with patients. I'm worried this is not enough. So anything where you're having hands-on experience with patients, hospice volunteer, caregiver, I think being a caregiver is like really good clinical experience. So yeah, and it's just really important when you're considering like what is clinical experience. It's not necessarily the title, it's more about your actual responsibilities and what you're doing.
If the person who said your question didn't get answered, can you just like put the question again or something? We're trying to go through them. But we are trying to answer questions related to primary application.
Yes. And I will also say, like, if we miss your question, I'm going to be posting this later, hopefully later this week, if not early next week on my social media. Oh God, I accidentally kicked my ring light. And if we did not get to answer your question, like, of course, like drop it in there and we can answer it then as well.
Yeah. So the question, we kind of answered this, but do professors have to teach you in a classroom setting? I would say definitely like research the schools that you're going to apply to, and kind of see about that, because
they will make it clear, or
yeah,
you can email them if it's not.
Definitely. I think I got away with it because I had a committee letter. And again, that trumped all like requirements. So I was filling out the requirements for my committee letter, not necessarily the schools. So I had a professor who was a research mentor. So yeah, so check that out. Okay, it's fast fire. In-person virtual shadowing into one activity. Yep, I did that. I just flipped it out.
Definitely.
Everything.
Update letters, don't even worry about those. Get your primary in right now. Primary, secondaries, we got a lot of time until update letters. There'll be posts on that when it's time.
Right, we'll talk about that. Only one science professor, one non-science professor. Look at the requirements. You might need 2 science professors.
Yeah, I would definitely try to get 2, but definitely check the schools that you're applying to. And do you think it's a red flag if you don't have all 15 spots filled? Definitely not. Quality over quantity, 100%.
Multiple leadership roles in one organization. If you missed it, definitely look back when we put up the recording. I have an example of 4 leadership roles in one organization in one activity. So I would list them all in one activity. Do most meaningful experiences need to be touched upon in a personal statement? No. personal statement, think about them as two separate things. Like personal statement, just like think about your story about why medicine, and definitely watch our personal statement webinar. If those happen to be things in your application, that's fine, but don't do it flip-flop where you're like, oh, if I mark this as most meaningful, it must be in my personal statement. Again, there's no formula, there's no rules. So think about it that way. Da, da, da.
Yeah, I think I've gone through them. I think the rest of them are like MCAT secondaries.
Yeah, I think we've answered these. If we didn't answer your question specifically, we might have answered something similar, and so that's why we're skipping it over. There were over 100 questions here tonight, guys.
Yeah, so yeah, we tried to get to most of the questions, or at least answer variations, because a lot of them are super similar. While Kyeisha is looking through questions, go ahead.
Yeah, here's someone put their missed question, so I want to get to it. They said, I've been a research assistant at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, but haven't presented anywhere. I don't know what kind of opportunity to ask my PI for. What things did you guys present about?
Oh yeah, so I just typed an answer to that one,
but
okay. I can answer it live as well. Yeah. So I think like you don't have to have a presentation or publication. I think the research in the process and doing the research is the most important. That's where you really learn the skills. So like just if there's any specific research projects that he's on, that your PI is doing that you're interested in, of course, like for your own personal like growth and interest, definitely ask him to get involved with that. But I think kind of like publications, presentations kind of come like a little bit later down the line. And if you don't have that in your application, like your research is still valid.
Absolutely. Here's maybe the last one. Someone's talking about taking a class, science and socialism, university health care systems, etc. And can they include this on a primary application? So I would say don't include things that are school related on your primary application. Those classes will come up in your classes. Here's again an opportunity where there might be secondaries. You might even get a secondary that's like, tell me about something you're passionate about, and you can talk all about these kind of social justice health care systems. But I want to answer this because in general, like don't put things that are like related to the classroom, like if that makes sense. Like it's a class, like don't put a class in your primary application.
Yeah, I think the only thing would be like if you do like research or whatever, like my research was technically for a class, but I also like got presented on that. So that's just something that's a little bit different.
Yeah. Okay, now I think we have answered all of these.
Yeah, so just like a little bit of follow-up, we will be posting on Instagram, on my Instagram, and also on Kyeisha's YouTube for the recording. And sorry, that's my blender downstairs. Thanks to my roommates. Do your review primary applications for students. Okay, Kyeisha answered that. She does on her website, and I'm currently closed. But just check my Instagram. I'll probably be opening up some more spots, honestly, like tomorrow, but I always post on my story when I open spots. So yeah, but I got to graduate first.
Yeah. Happy to help. Well, yeah, thank you guys for joining us. Again, we were just in your shoes last year, and we know it's a lot, and the application, it's a lot. It's very stressful. There's a lot going on, but just keep taking it step by step, and it's so worth it when you get that interview and that acceptance, and you'll be in our shoes next year. And maybe one of you guys will take over webinars next year, because you know we'll be in med school and we might not have the time. That 1 year
will be rough.
It's looking a little scary.
Yeah, but
so yeah, it's a pleasure. It's absolute pleasure.
Yeah, this is like the last one that we have scheduled, but like we're hoping to do something maybe on like secondaries. We don't know. We'll figure it out as time goes. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. And good luck to everybody applying this cycle, or just wherever you're at in your pre-med journey, or your life, wherever you're at in your life. Good luck.
Have a great night, everyone.